Greetings, fellow cultivators. Welcome to Autonova. Remember to like and subscribe to support the journey. Now, let's dive into the next chapter of A Will Eternal. The younger of the twin master cloud lightnings had no time to even feel the terror of impending destruction. His body was simply destroyed by the massive, explosive attack. His nascent divinity flew out into the open, eyes blank as he stared around at the devastation. It was in that moment that a stream of divine sense appeared that far surpassed Deva's. It descended in the form of a huge hand that grabbed the nascent divinity. As the explosive force of Bai Xiaochun's attack was dissipated by that enormous hand, a grating voice echoed out from nowhere. Bai Xiaochun. Each of the characters that made up his name was uttered in a voice that crackled like heavenly thunder. The words exploded into the minds of everyone present as a gigantic figure appeared up above. It was the demigod patriarch, who held the listless and dispirited lightning ancestor in his hand. The demigod drove away the will of the heavens in the area, ensuring that he was the only paramount entity in all creation. When Bai Xiaochun heard his words, and felt the pressure weighing down on the area, his previous brazenness and momentum vanished, to be replaced with profound nervousness. The old monkey turned out to be useless, he wailed inwardly. Couldn't he have stretched things out for a bit longer? I was just about to get away. Now I'm really in for it. What do I do? As Bai Xiaochun hovered there nervously, Master Cloud Lightning double-checked that his other self's nascent divinity was safe, and then clasped hands and bowed deeply to the demigod patriarch. The other northern devas all breathed sighs of relief. Bai Xiaochun really had been putting on too dramatic of a display of strength, leaving them completely shaken. As they clasped hands in greeting, the bedraggled Feng Chen emerged from the crystal coffin to also excitedly offer greetings. Scowling on the verge of tears, Bai Xiaochun began to edge backward, scrambling to come up with a way to resolve the situation. Meanwhile, the demigod patriarch, while unable to suppress his rage, was also feeling a major headache coming on. The truth was that he was relatively helpless in this situation. There was basically nothing he could do about Bai Xiaochun, not because of Du Lingfei, but because of the celestial. There was evidence that the demigod could detect on Bai Xiaochun that Bai Xiaochun himself could not. Based on the conclusions that evidence pointed to, and on certain other matters that the demigod patriarch was aware of, he had an inkling that the celestial had something important planned for him. Because of those speculations, he knew that he couldn't do anything too harmful to Bai Xiaochun. Furthermore, he now knew that locking him up wouldn't do any good. After all, he had already destroyed Lightning Penitentiary, and very nearly freed the Lightning Ancestor. The patriarch didn't dare to incarcerate him, and had finally woken up to the truth of matters. At long last, he realized that Bai Xiaochun could cause disasters without any warning. Therefore, the best thing to do was keep him at a distance. Damn it, how did I ever agree to keep this damned disaster confined in the sect? He's like an unstable lightning bolt just sitting in your pocket, ready to explode without warning. In the end, he sighed. Never before in his life had he ever met anyone who could be as frustrating as Bai Xiaochun. Meanwhile, Bai Xiaochun was feeling profoundly nervous. His heart pounded as he tried to think of some way to get out of trouble, and yet, he couldn't. Finally, he braced himself, looked up at the demigod, and hesitantly said, "Hey there, eldest brother demigod, would you like to attend me and Feifei's wedding?" Despite Bai Xiaochun's nervousness, he had to marvel at his own quick-wittedness. After all, his one simple sentence actually emphasized three important matters. First, that he had an intimate relationship with Du Lingfei, and that they would likely marry in the future. Second, that the celestial would become his father-in-law. Third, that he hoped to calm the situation down. It didn't matter whether the demigod would actually pick up on all three. As far as Bai Xiaochun was concerned, it was really an amazing play on his part. In response to his words, the demigod patriarch slowly looked up and fixed his gaze dead on Bai Xiaochun. Waving his hand, he spoke in a very irritated voice. "If I ever see you in the Nine Heavens Cloud Lightning sect again, then it won't matter if you're the celestial son-in-law. I'll skin you alive. Now screw off." His words exploded like thunder, especially the last two. Heaven and earth shook violently as a massive force wrapped Bai Xiaochun up, ripped him up into the air, and then hurled him out of the Nine Heavens Cloud Lightning sect. A miserable shriek echoed out as he flew through the air off into the distance. The northern cultivators were a bit let down, but at the same time, were all breathing sighs of relief. They hated Bai Xiaochun, and yet feared him, Master Cloud Lightning included. In addition to the bitterness that most of them felt, the majority regretted that any limitations or torments had been placed on Bai Xiaochun, he who should never, ever be limited or tormented. He is truly the epitome of a walking disaster. His most powerful divine ability is his ability to cause disasters. We were real fools back at the beginning. A guy like that should never be allowed to stay inside the sect. Master Cloud Lightning chuckled bitterly and sighed endlessly, but at the same time, was profoundly shaken by Bai Xiaochun's battle prowess. Furthermore, when it came to the Cloud Lightning forefather technique, the fact that the demigod patriarch had the lightning ancestor in his custody suddenly caused Master Cloud Lightning to realize what had happened. Although the lightning ancestor was in bad shape, he wasn't unconscious, and the twisted smile on his face revealed the truth. Clearly, he was very pleased at all of the chaos which had been caused in the sect. So, that kid's name is Bai Xiaochun, the lightning ancestor said. Not bad at all. He's definitely going to go places in this world. He chuckled loudly. The demigod patriarch ignored the lightning ancestor, and instead turned toward the Devas. A group of powerful, majestic Devas, all joined forces against Bai Xiaochun, and ended up in this miserable state. Useless fools. After cursing the Devas a bit more, he turned grimly and dragged the lightning ancestor with him back to his crystal coffin. The Devas accepted the criticism in bitter silence. Afterward, they exchanged awkward, helpless glances. Whatever. At least he was kicked out. This Bai Xiaochun is a legend. I've never seen anything like him. Even when locked up in prison, he still managed a cultivation-based breakthrough. I don't ever want to see him again as long as I live. And you know what, the rest of you had best never even mention his name around me. The Devas weren't the only ones to react like that. The disciples from the Cloud Order and Lightning Order were all sighing deeply, and thinking back to how they never should have tried to keep Bai Xiaochun suppressed. Back then, they had chuckled proudly at how the supposed dragon that was Bai Xiaochun had become nothing more than a worm after arriving in the north. But now, Bai Xiaochun had used his actions to deliver a message loud and clear to the northerners. Maybe he was a worm, but he could still poke the north full of holes. In the end, everyone was basically thinking the same thing. That walking disaster had better not ever come back here. As the northerners were sighing in exhaustion because of Bai Xiaochun, he was flying through the air off into the distance, almost like a meteor. Eventually, he landed, smashing into the icy plain far away from the sect. The ice shivered, and his landing made a huge crater, which he eventually crawled out of, his hair disheveled, his robes in tatters. Scowling in indignation, he turned to look back in the direction of the Nine Heavens Cloud Lightning sect. Finally, he sighed. If you wanted me to leave, you could have just said so. Why the hell did you have to seal my cultivation base and throw me through the air? From what he could tell, these northerners were all completely unreasonable, and scoundrels through and through. They were essentially villains, especially the demigod patriarch. He was the worst of all. Whatever. If they don't want me there, then that's fine. Besides, if they hadn't restricted me in the first place, I would have left a long time ago. Sighing again, he reviewed everything he had accomplished in the Nine Heavens Cloud Lightning sect, and actually felt quite proud of himself. HMMMPHH. They sure know how awesome I am now, don't they? How dare they limit Bai Xiaochun with a 5-point covenant? He took a deep breath of icy air, feeling very excited to, at long last, be free of any restrictions. It was a wonderfully relaxing feeling. Well, nobody's here to tell me what to do. I guess I can plant my moonflower again, right? After all, the ice leaf he was working on was only about half finished. After looking around, he found a nice place to hew out a temporary immortals cave. He spent a few minutes organizing it a bit, then took out his moonflower seed and then dug a hole in the ground. Moonflower, baby, nobody's here to tell us what to do now. Hurry up and grow as fast as you can. Face glowing with anticipation, he dropped the moonflower seed into the hole. There were no restrictions in place, and thus, no need to be cautious. This was the moonflower's third chance to grow, and it held nothing back. In a short 3 days, it grew more than it had in a month back in the Cloud Order. Most of the Immortals cave that Bai Xiaochun had created was now filled with moonflower branches. As for the main stalk of the flower itself, it was already over a dozen meters tall. Were it not for the fact that Bai Xiaochun had started to feel cramped, and voiced his dissatisfaction by clearing his throat, the moonflower would have taken over the whole cave. However, after sensing his irritation, it had left an area aside for his use. Eventually, the moonflower began to spread out on the icy plain, until it filled the entire 5-kilometer area. Bai Xiaochun had grafted the ice leaf onto the flower from the very beginning. Back in the Nine Heavens Cloud Lightning sect, there had been too many people keeping a close eye on him. Coupled with the 5-point covenant, he had been too nervous to do any cultivation. But now, he was making slow progress with his undying blood. Since he finally had an opportunity to practice cultivation away from any prying eyes, he pulled out the 2 skeletons he had in his bag of holding. These were the skeletons that he had taken from Deck 2 of Ghost Mother's ship, the ones which were partially fused at the skull. Back when he had first touched the skeletons, he had sensed a powerful life force within the skulls that caused his undying blood to surge. Unfortunately, there had been no time to do anything with them. But now that he had a chance to study the gold and crystal skulls together up close, he began to reach certain conclusions. I'm working on my undying blood, which means that I've almost finished cultivating the Undying Codex. Unfortunately, I never found any information about the Live Forever Codex. These skeletons are the only clue I've ever come across. With that, he reached out and placed his hands onto the 2 skeletons. The instant he did, a powerful life force rushed into him. He shivered. This life force was very different from the type he had acquired through medicinal pills that were concocted from plants and vegetation. The life force from the skeletons was perfectly suited for his undying blood and in fact, didn't need to be refined at all. It immediately caused drop after drop of blood inside of him to be converted to undying blood. It only took a few breaths worth of time for the first drop to form, and then another. So fast, he murmured, eyes shining with excitement. Now that he was in the mid-diva realm, his battle prowess had shot to a much higher level. And yet, it would only get stronger if he upgraded his undying blood. An entire month went by in which he was completely focused on cultivation. During that time, no one bothered him. He spent all of his time absorbing life force from the skeletons and building up more and more undying blood. Soon, he had converted 20% of his total blood supply into undying blood. And it kept going. There seemed to be no end to the supply of life force in the skeletons. To Bai Xiaochun, it felt just like when he had been cultivating the sun-moon vast sky incantation in Lightning Penitentiary. Don't tell me that these 2 skeletons will push my undying blood all the way to completion. The mere thought had him itching with excitement, and so focused was he on cultivation, that he didn't even spare a moment to check on the moonflower. During the past month of wild, unchecked growth, the moonflower plant had expanded in shocking fashion. It was now several dozen meters tall, and extremely conspicuous in its location on the plain. In fact, there were many locations on the ice in which little moonflowers were now visible. The plain itself seemed to be shrinking, with moonflower roots filling an area hundreds of kilometers across. The moonflowers seemed to pulse with life, causing countless wild beasts that inhabited the plains to flee in terror. As the plant grew, absorbing more and more frigid qi, it never forgot what Bai Xiaochun had asked it to do. It continued to send the frigid qi into the leaf, which grew more and more complete. Another entire month went by, during which Bai Xiaochun remained just as focused on cultivation. Only by this point did the life force within the 2 skeletons show signs of drying up. After he finally absorbed it all, he opened his eyes. He almost immediately noticed the differences within himself. Although he looked the same, he now had a shockingly abundant life force within him. He could also sense that his powers of regeneration had improved. He even pulled out a sword and cut himself as a test. The wound immediately closed, and a moment later, no sign of the injury could be seen. The undying blood's greatest power has to do with regeneration. Gasping, he cast his senses inside to check his blood, and soon found that in his 2 months of absorbing the life force from the skeletons, 40% of his blood had become undying blood. So fast. Almost unable to believe that it was true, he did some more checking, and then finally began to laugh loudly. The 2 skeletons were now much darker than before. But, I might still be able to use them. He put them away, musing about what good fortune they had turned out to be. He rose to his feet and shook out his arms and legs, then sent his divine sense out to check on the moonflower. Almost instantly, his eyes went wide. The once icy plain was now covered with dark soil, and was more than half filled by moonflower roots. Although it didn't count for much when compared to the north as a whole, Bai Xiaochun was still shocked by how much it had grown. The plain was now covered with moonflowers. Furthermore, the sky was also filled with the flowers, which had grown together to make a larger form that looked like a crescent moon. In the very middle of that crescent moon was a huge flower. After staring in shock for a moment, he murmured, "Moonflower, baby, is that you?" There was a crystalline leaf on the huge flower which was particularly eye-catching. In response to Bai Xiaochun's question, the flower shivered, sending the ice leaf floating down toward him. Even as the leaf settled onto his palm, the moonflower's mind reached out and spoke to him. Not with words, but with thoughts alone. It was both thankful, and said that it would miss him. It couldn't grow any further on this ice plain, and hoped that Bai Xiaochun would agree to let it move on to another ice plain to grow even more. Considering how many little animals Bai Xiaochun had fed medicinal pills to in the past, it was no surprise to him that the flower had become intelligent to a certain degree. After all, it was a very mysterious flower that came from beyond the heavens. In terms of the flower's request to go out on its own, Bai Xiaochun was initially hesitant, but in the end, agreed. However, he gave the flower strict instructions not to harm any people. When the moonflower received his answer, it shivered in excitement. Then, Bai Xiaochun watched as the enormous flower shriveled up into a multitude of dandelion-like seeds that floated out of the plain and headed in random directions. For some reason, the sight of the innumerable dandelion-like seeds filling the sky seemed very familiar, although he couldn't quite remember when he had seen anything else like it. It was almost as if, somewhere deep in his soul, there was some sort of eternal memory that would always be a part of him. Maybe I saw something like this when I was a kid? He shook his head as the seeds drifted off into the distance. A moment later, a bright beam of light appeared, within which was a young woman. Du Lingfei had returned. At first, Bai Xiaochun was shocked, but a moment later, a smile split his face. Boo! Even from a distance, Du Lingfei could see that Bai Xiaochun was not injured, and in fact, was jumping up and down in lively fashion. Looking as though she were slightly annoyed by something, she flew down to him. Xiaochun, I can't believe what you did in the 9 heavens. Stop, Boo. Stop right there. Let's just enjoy the happiness of finally being reunited. Don't even bring up those bastards in the 9 heavens cloud lightning sect. You have no idea how horrible those people are. With that, he went on to give a very detailed account of the humiliation he had endured in the sect. Du Lingfei sighed. She had originally intended to talk with him about what had occurred, but in the end, she just listened. Actually, Du Lingfei had been out on the mission for her father the entire time, and had only returned to the sect a few days before to check on Bai Xiaochun. When she arrived, she almost couldn't believe the situation, and that was even considering how much she knew about Bai Xiaochun and his affinity for causing disasters. Furthermore, the disciples in the sect had all given her very strange looks. Therefore, she had gone out to try to find Bai Xiaochun, only to discover that he wasn't returning any of her messages. Eventually, she noticed that one of the ice plains was melting, a curious scene which led her to suspect that Bai Xiaochun might be involved. And that was what had led to their reunion. Seeing how worked up Bai Xiaochun was getting, Du Lingfei sighed and said, all right. I won't bring it up again. Happy? Then she stepped up to him and began to smooth out his disheveled hair and robes. I'm almost done with the tasks at hand, but I still have a few things left to do. You can't just sit around here, why don't you come along? She was so close that he instantly caught a whiff of her perfume, causing him to blink a few times in a row. Her skin was as fair as freshly fallen snow, and to have her beautiful face so close to him caused his heart to start beating a bit more rapidly. Although he actually did like the idea of tagging along with her, he also knew that for a true, manly man like himself to be following a woman around wasn't really proper, unless he was her bodyguard or something similar. Another acceptable reason would be if she asked him several times. Sticking his chin up, he said, I'm doing fine right here. You just go take care of your business. Covering her smile, she looked him up and down. Then she took a step closer and rested her hand on his shoulder. Xiaochun, I'm really very lonely on my own. Come along. Why not? Bai Xiaochun was both very pleased and also quite enjoyed hearing her talk to him like this. However, he maintained his aloof expression. I'll think about it. Keeping the smile on her face, she lowered her voice a bit and said, considering how much that Feng Chen from the 9 heavens cloud lightning sect is scared of you, as long as I have you around, then he definitely won't come bothering me. What do you say, Xiaochun? Well, you got that right, he replied, feeling even prouder of himself than ever. If that Feng fellow dares to appear in my presence, I'll beat him to death. He's already lost his fleshly body, and exists only as a divine soul. If Master Cloud Lightning and the other devas hadn't stopped me, I would already have killed him. With that, he laughed heartily. Whatever, since you put it that way, I guess I might as well join you. That will be the easiest way to keep you safe. At this point, Du Lingfei couldn't hold back any longer, and started laughing. Of course. My Xiaochun is the most awesome of all. He dared to call the Celestial his father-in-law right to his face. Bai Xiaochun suddenly felt a bit awkward. Well, if you want to be my bodyguard, she said, casting a seductive glance at him as she turned, then you'd better keep up. That got Bai Xiaochun's heart beating even faster. He had always assumed that Song Junwan was the greatest vixen of all, but as it turned out, the seemingly upstanding Du Lingfei was actually even worse. Get back here, you demoness, he said loudly, hurrying after her. Laughter rang out across the ice plains as the two of them made their way off into the distance. It was almost as if they were back in the spirit stream sect. Above them stretched an azure sky, and around them, endless fields of ice. They were the only living beings visible as they traveled along in that world of silver whiteness. Occasionally they would laugh, and occasionally they would lower their voices as they spoke of serious matters. They talked about their experiences and their stories. Eventually, that sense of distance that Bai Xiaochun had felt was gone. Du Lingfei was once again the same Bu that he remembered from years ago. A month later, when they were in the depths of the ice plains, Bai Xiaochun couldn't hold back from asking a question that had been on his mind for a long time. Bu, what is this mission that Dad sent you on? From the direct way he asked the question, he didn't seem to feel that it was an inappropriate topic at all. You know, Du Lingfei said with an enigmatic smile, I'd really like to see you address him that way the next time you see him in person. Bai Xiaochun laughed dryly. He very much wanted to thump himself on the chest and declare that he absolutely would dare to do exactly that. However, whenever he thought about that blood hair that he had absorbed, he couldn't help but feel guilty and nervous. Clearing his throat, he once again asked about what Du Lingfei was doing in the north. Du Lingfei was hesitant to answer the question. Her mission was top secret, and the details were not to be discussed. However, Bai Xiaochun's curious expression got the better of her. I'll tell you, but you have to promise not to tell anyone else. Lowering her voice, she continued, my father sent me here to investigate some things connected to my eldest sister. You have an eldest sister? Bai Xiaochun said, sounding surprised. Of course, he immediately thought back to the baby girl. You see, Du Lingfei said, the Nine Heavens Cloud Lightning sect wasn't always the River Source sect here in the north. There used to be another sect called the Frigid School. The demigod matriarch of the Frigid School was my father's top apprentice. That's why I call her eldest sister. The Frigid matriarch betrayed my father and committed some heinous crimes. Because of their master-apprentice relationship, my father intended to capture her, not kill her. However, she turned out to be the epitome of malevolence and continued to plot against him. In the end, it was to his great bitterness that he realized he had to kill her. Of course, these were things that Du Lingfei had only heard about, not witnessed personally. However, my eldest sister was a person of spectacular talent and ability. Years later, my father began to suspect that something peculiar had occurred. Therefore, he sent me here, to where the Frigid School had once existed, to perform a thorough investigation. He wants to know whether or not that eldest sister really did die. The truth is that I've been investigating this matter for many years now. In fact, that's why I was in the Spirit Stream sect. The Spirit Stream sect was originally founded by the surviving disciples of the Frigid School, who escaped to the east to start a new sect. She looked over at Bai Xiaochun, who was secretly shaken to the core that she was here in the north because of the baby girl. Also, he now understood why the daughter of the mighty Celestial had been in the Spirit Stream sect. But what were you doing in the trial by fire for Bloodmaster in the Bloodstream sect? Looking over, he asked another question that had been burning in his heart for a very long time. Du Lingfei took her time to respond. Because the Bloodstream sect's blood ancestor was the Taoist partner of my eldest sister. If my speculations are correct, the blood ancestor died, but my eldest sister didn't. And most likely, she would want to accompany her husband after his death. Her words struck Bai Xiaochun's mind like countless bolts of lightning. All of a sudden, so many things were made clear. Why had the Celestial left the blood ancestor in place for so many years? Why had the spell formation protecting the baby girl in the depths of the Spirit Stream sect been weakened after Du Lingfei left the sect? He now knew the answers to those questions. However, there was still one big question that he didn't know the answer to, and didn't dare to ask right now. Why had the Celestial sent his daughter to investigate these matters, instead of doing it himself? Considering the shocking level of the Celestial's own cultivation base, he could easily turn the world upside down to get the information he wanted. Furthermore, was the Celestial truly unaware of the existence of that baby girl? Secrets. Everyone has secrets. Whether a person is a brother, sister, friend, lover, or even a parent, everyone has secrets that they wish to keep from others. Secrets are one thing, but when those secrets turn deadly, they can cause even two people with the closest of relationships to drift apart. That was what had occurred between Du Lingfei and Bai Xiaochun. He had his secrets regarding the Spirit Stream sect, the baby girl, and the world treasure of the north. All of them were things that he definitely couldn't talk about. Du Lingfei could see that there were things he wanted to keep to himself, and she didn't press him. And thus, they proceeded along silently for a while. Eventually, Du Lingfei said something seemingly completely out of the blue. In the past, I used to tell my father everything. But after the Spirit Stream sect, I stopped doing that. When it comes to observations or speculations, I tell him some things, and keep other things to myself. Bai Xiaochun suddenly looked over at her. The meaning behind her words was clear, she wouldn't tell the Celestial all of the details about matters between the two of them. After another protracted silence, Du Lingfei lowered her voice again and said, "My father has changed in recent years." Bai Xiaochun's mood had sunk deeply. The closeness he had felt with Du Lingfei earlier was now changing, and it was in complete silence that they continued on their way through the ice plains. He wasn't sure exactly where they were headed, and didn't know if Du Lingfei even had a destination in mind. At a certain point, the wind picked up, and it started snowing. It began to grow dark, and eventually, the entire sky was filled with snow. It fell on his clothing and hair, and also into the footsteps he left behind him as he walked, until they were covered, making it seem as if he hadn't even passed by. The snowfall grew heavier, and the wind louder, until it seemed like the shrieking of countless evil ghosts. It was starting to get unsettling. After some hesitation, Bai Xiaochun turned to Du Lingfei, and when he saw the snow that had built up on her hair and shoulders, said, "Why don't we find a place to?" However, before he could finish speaking, his expression flickered as a profound sensation of deadly crisis rose up in him, causing his hair to stand on end. Without a moment of hesitation, he grabbed Du Lingfei in his arms and pulled her backward. Du Lingfei gasped, allowing Bai Xiaochun to fly backward with her, and simultaneously performing a double-handed incantation gesture. Then she reached up with her right index finger and touched her forehead. In that moment, a shadowy figure appeared within the snow in the spot she had just occupied. It was almost as if the thing had teleported into place, and along with it came an explosively deadly aura. As soon as the shadowy figure appeared, it shot forward in a blast of wind toward Bai Xiaochun and Du Lingfei. Of course, all of this takes some time to describe, but happened as quickly as light bouncing off of a mirror. As the shadowy figure pounced, Du Lingfei's finger touched her forehead, and a golden blast of light shot out to envelop both her and Bai Xiaochun. Then they vanished, to reappear a moment later, 300 meters away. Seemingly furious, the shadowy figure let out a piercing cry as it spun and shot toward them again. By now, Bai Xiaochun and Du Lingfei were able to see clearly what they were facing, despite all of the snow blowing in the air. The shadowy figure was a ball of black smoke, in the middle of which was a face that appeared to be laughing, but not, crying, but not. It possessed a shocking ghost chi as it shrieked and again tried to pounce on the two of them. As soon as Bai Xiaochun saw that face, his mind spun, and he cried, "Why you? It's you." This ghost face had once been part of the 3 ghost flags on Ghost Mother's bone galleon. He had intentionally allowed himself to be grabbed by the Celestial so that he would be separated from the ghost galleon and remain in the Heavenspan realm. The Celestial had chased after him, but the laughing crying ghost face had used an unknown divine ability to vanish into thin air. And now, here he was, radiating a murderous aura as he tried to kill Bai Xiaochun and Du Lingfei. What is he doing here? Bai Xiaochun thought. There was no time for thinking or planning. The laughing crying ghost face closed in, staining the snow black with its ghost chi, and transforming it into countless blades that shot forth in attack. Letting out a shout, Bai Xiaochun unleashed the 5th of the Cloud Lightning Forefather transformations, bolstered by the Living Mountain incantation. Moonlight spilled out of his left eye as his left hand utilized the Water Swamp Kingdom, and his right hand punched out with an undying Emperor's Fist. He was leading, with his strongest state, and 2 of his biggest trump cards. He felt a huge amount of pressure from this ghost face, which surpassed the Diva realm by far. In fact, he wasn't even sure exactly how strong the ghost face was. As Bai Xiaochun made his move, Du Lingfei took a breath and performed a double-handed incantation gesture, causing more golden light to erupt out from her, which took the form of a golden phoenix. Golden flames erupted off of the phoenix as it soared over the ice plain to meet the ghost face. Upon seeing Bai Xiaochun and Du Lingfei joining forces to fight it, the ghost face cackled as though all of this were some hilarious joke. Then, he suddenly twisted and distorted, transforming into a clawed hand. It was pitch black, with razor-sharp claws that sliced the air open as it slashed forward. The clawed hand hit the Water Swamp Kingdom first, causing a deafening boom to fill the air. As for the clawed hand summoned by the Water Swamp Kingdom, it was instantly destroyed. A defiant howl echoed out, and Bai Xiaochun shuddered violently, coughing up a mouthful of blood. That was when Du Lingfei's golden phoenix hit the ghost claw. The fiery, golden phoenix was also destroyed almost effortlessly, and emitted a miserable shriek as it faded away from existence. Du Lingfei also coughed up blood, and 3 gaping wounds appeared on her shoulder that cut all the way down to the bone. That was when Bai Xiaochun's right hand, powered by the forefather transformation and the living mountain incantation, landed an undying emperor's fist. Heaven and earth shook violently as Bai Xiaochun's forefather transformation vanished, and his living mountain incantation form was destroyed. Blood sprayed out of his mouth as his undying emperor's fist was summarily vanquished. He and Du Lingfei acting in unison could unleash incredible power, and yet that ghost hand destroyed all of their divine abilities, and barely paused in the process. However, that slight pause was all the time Du Lingfei needed to perform another incantation gesture. Golden light swept out, covering both her and the bleeding Bai Xiaochun, and then whisking them away. This time, they appeared 3,000 meters away. However, Du Lingfei didn't hesitate to unleash yet another divine ability, causing flickering light to spread out which took them 30,000 meters away. And then, more light glittered as they vanished again. It all happened in the blink of an eye. A moment later, the clawed ghost hand once again transformed into a laughing, crying ghost face, his eyes shining with both scorn and avarice. "You can't escape," the ghost face said, his voice like a combination of countless other voices. Smiling crookedly, he began to speed through the air, following the auras of Bai Xiaochun and Du Lingfei, which he could sense as surely as a torch on a dark night. Off in the distance, Bai Xiaochun and Du Lingfei were wrapped up by golden light as Du Lingfei used her secret magic over and over again to teleport away. "What is that thing doing here?" Racked with anxiety and unease, Bai Xiaochun took out some medicinal pills for both himself and Du Lingfei. As for him, his undying blood was already at work, ensuring that his fleshly body power was already almost completely back to normal. Even still, it was clear that he was absolutely no match for that ghost face, who was clearly far beyond the level of a diva. After all, he and Du Lingfei working together would be virtually invincible to anything under the level of a demigod. "I think I might know why he's here," Du Lingfei said. "I'm guessing that my father is coming." A cold gleam passed through her eyes, and yet, when she said the word, "father," she shivered as though in pain. In response to Du Lingfei's words, Bai Xiaochun's eyes glittered with surprise. Something seemed very odd with how she felt about the matter. When a daughter was in trouble, it was the most natural of things for her father to come help her, at least as far as Bai Xiaochun was concerned. However, he didn't say anything. As his body continued to recover, he grabbed her arm and pulled her along. Adding the undying hexen gave them a bit more speed. When combined with the golden light of teleportation that Du Lingfei used, it gave them enough speed to at least flee from the laughing crying ghost face, who was capable of speeds similar to the celestial himself. Unfortunately, despite being able to achieve speeds that surpassed the diva realm, they were still roughly comparable to a demigod, therefore, the ghost face continued to close in no matter what they did. Soon, they heard the sound of screaming winds behind them, as well as the shrieks of evil ghosts. Du Lingfei was in worse shape than she was letting on. When her golden flame phoenix was ripped apart by the clawed ghost hand earlier, she had received 3 shocking wounds. Although she was able to suppress the effects to some degree, as soon as the sound of the ghost's voice reached her, the wounds began to leak black smoke. The smoke itself formed countless ghost heads, who laughed in profoundly sinister nature. She began to cough up blood, and her face was a sickly ashen color. However, her eyes continued to shine with cold light. She was the daughter of the Celestial, and possessed powerful life-saving magical items, and yet, she knew that this ghost face had come from beyond the heavens on Ghost Mother's bone galleon, and therefore, there was no way she could stand up to him. Her best bet now was to rely on her golden light to flee as quickly as possible. In terms of both speed and defenses, it would be hard to find someone that was her match in the lands of Heavenspan. Not even a demigod would be able to harm her in any short amount of time. Unfortunately, she wasn't dealing with a demigod, she was dealing with a ghost face from beyond the heavens, someone roughly as powerful as her father, the Celestial. Bai Xiaochun felt hurt at heart to see blood oozing out of her mouth, and the black smoke rising up from her shoulder. He quickly patted his bag of holding to produce some medicinal pills that could help. "There's no time for that now," she said through gritted teeth. "We need to get out of here now." With that, she employed another teleportation. Unfortunately, this teleportation was too much for her to handle. Her injuries worsened, and the black smoke began to pour out in greater volume. "You're hurt too bad," Bai Xiaochun said urgently. "Even if we don't have time, we have to do something to treat you." Without any further explanation, he reached out and ripped her garment a bit, exposing what was now the pitch-black skin of her shoulder, and 3 deep wounds that exposed white bone in their depths, with rotting and necrotic flesh on the surface. Another stab of pain hit Bai Xiaochun in the heart, but it was without any hesitation that he made a grasping gesture, which caused all of the rotting flesh to be ripped out of her shoulder, exposing more bone. Shockingly, her bones were not like those of ordinary people. Her bones looked like crystal, and emanated an aura that Bai Xiaochun found to be very familiar, so familiar, that his jaw dropped. Due to the urgency of the situation, there was no time for thought or planning. He quickly pulled out a medicinal pill, crushed it, and placed the powder into the wound. Then he rotated his cultivation base and began to directly treat her wound. As the golden light flickered around her, and as Bai Xiaochun offered assistance, her wound began to heal up. Without any hesitation, she performed another teleportation, causing them to reappear further off in the distance. Once out in the open, they sped onward. The screaming wind and the howling of the ghost behind them was obviously getting closer, and yet, Bai Xiaochun simply couldn't stop thinking about the sight of the crystal bones from moments ago. After hesitating for a bit, he finally decided that it didn't matter that they were so focused on fleeing. He simply had to ask the question. Your bones. How come they're crystal? They weren't like that back in the Spirit Stream sect, were they? Du Lingfei didn't seem surprised by the question. If anyone else had asked it, she would have ignored them, but since it was Bai Xiaochun, she lowered her voice and said, "My father had me cultivate something called the celestial incantation, which forms celestial bones." Celestial bones, Bai Xiaochun replied. He was fairly certain that she wasn't deceiving him, and yet, couldn't drive the picture of those crystal bones out of his mind. Of the two skeletons he had acquired back on the Bone Galleon, one had golden bones, and the other had crystal bones, a result of cultivating the Live Forever Codex. The aura from the crystal bones of the Live Forever Codex was very similar to Du Lingfei's crystal bones, and yet, was also slightly different. Bai Xiaochun's thinking was instantly thrown into chaos. And yet, he had no choice but to try to still his mind and focus on helping Du Lingfei to flee. In some ways, it seemed as if a long time had passed since they began their escape. However, the truth was that only enough time had passed for an incense stick to burn. Du Lingfei performed another teleportation, after which, they were surrounded by a screaming wind and the wailing, cackling voice of a ghost. "You run pretty fast." It sounded like a host of voices all speaking at the same time, and was spoken in the playful tone of a cat playing with a mouse. Bai Xiaochun's face fell, and Du Lingfei suddenly spun in another direction. However, before they could do anything else, the sky went dim, and thunderous rumbling echoed out as a huge black ghost hand appeared and shot toward them. Blood sprayed out of the mouths of both Bai Xiaochun and Du Lingfei. They managed to avoid the blow directly, but they both felt stabbing pain as they lost connection with their cultivation bases and fell out of the sky. Even as they landed on the ground, the black smoke that made up the ghost hand began to spread out, filling the entire 3,000-meter area and creating something like a prison, separated from the rest of the world. Innumerable evil ghosts could be seen weaving in and out of the smoke, snapping at Bai Xiaochun and Du Lingfei. Thankfully, the golden light surrounding Du Lingfei held strong, although it did ripple and distort under the assault. From high above in the sky, that 3,000-meter area of black smoke looked like a huge ghost face. And Bai Xiaochun and Du Lingfei were actually in its mouth. What a lovely flavor. Delicious. It was definitely worth it to chase you here. Once I digest the two of you, I should be back to my peak level of power. This golden light is pretty annoying, but in the end, it's just too weak. Meanwhile, the evil ghosts surrounding Bai Xiaochun and Du Lingfei continued to rush toward them. Bai Xiaochun and Du Lingfei both had shocking battle prowess, but within that 3,000-meter area of black smoke, they simply couldn't stand firm against the countless evil ghosts. Every time they destroyed some with a fist strike, more would take their place. As for Du Lingfei's golden sphere of light, it was getting very weak, and was even starting to tremble on the verge of collapse. Once it was gone, it was easy to imagine how the surrounding evil ghosts would pounce on them. "When is your father getting here?" Bai Xiaochun asked nervously. It was a deadly moment of crisis, and if the Celestial didn't show up to save them, Bai Xiaochun could only think of one way to get out of it. He would have to use the ice leaf to wake up the baby girl. However, he wasn't even sure if the ice leaf would wake her up right now, and if it did, whether or not she could defeat the ghost face. "He's already here," Du Lingfei said quietly. "What?" Bai Xiaochun replied, a look of shock appearing on his face. In that very moment, the golden light that surrounded them finally collapsed, and the evil ghosts howled as they prepared to attack. However, before they could, the shattered golden light converged to form a golden lightning bolt. The golden lightning bolt slashed out into the black smoke, crushing all of the evil ghosts it encountered as easily as a boulder crushing a drinking glass. Boom! The black smoke was cut into two parts, which then spilled out in all directions and reformed into the laughing, crying ghost face. The ghost face looked over at the golden lightning bolt, eyes flashing with anger as he yelled, "Celestial!" Thus, this episode comes to an end. Remember to like and comment so we can discuss the story together. Until we meet again in the next chapters.